All right. Why do we have no audio? All right. Looks like we're good now. Let me All right, sweet. I won't need this for now. I'll figure that piece out later. But welcome in everybody. Wanted to finally have some, sit some time aside, chat all things Jets football. Training camps around. We got the Haason Reddick drama creeping back up. We have joint practices coming up with the Carolina Panthers. So appreciate y'all hanging in there with the audio issues going on. I am also going to be dropping in the chat. Anybody that wants to jump on, please feel free. Other than that, though, let's kick things off with training camp. Right now, we've had a number of players that look like they're excelling, right? And actually, let me get into the depth chart that the New York Jets put out unofficially, of course. Where are you? Where are you? Here we go. So we have our unofficial depth chart. Share screen. Here we go. Boom. So we want to kick things off. We can run down this list and kind of talk through some of the stuff I've been seeing, right? So Garrett Wilson, we've hyped him up all year. Nothing's changed, right? At this point, seeing Aaron Rodgers, seeing how he's been able to maneuver and manipulate around him, he looks like he's ready to go, right? We have Sean Jefferson, our wide receiver coach, that was chatting about how Garrett Wilson wanted him to unleash him during the Commanders practices, right? And that's exactly what he did. He went out there and he was torching Emmanuel Forbes left and right, right? Not only that, though, when you talk about our defense, our bread and butter, defensive line, secondary, specifically with the cornerbacks, he's been winning some of his matchups, right? Let's just call it a toss up 50-50 battle. He's been winning some of his matchups against Sauce Gardner. That's already a huge plus because it's very hard to get anything around Sauce Gardner. Two, DJ Reed, I consider him, a pretty high tier cornerback, a CB1, even if you want to put him in the low tier of that group. And he's been absolutely destroying DJ Reed, right? And DJ Reed brings a different skill set, some different traits than Sauce Gardner, right? Smaller, shiftier. He plays bigger than he is, right? There's a lot more scrap to his game than I think you would expect. As opposed to Sauce Gardner, who brings maybe a little bit more finesse because he has the length, he has the speed, he has the recovery ability. So very, very impressed by Garrett Wilson. And with a lot of the predictions I've been seeing, I really wouldn't be surprised if he can crack 1,500 yards. If he does get 8 to 10 touchdowns on the season, he could potentially do more, right? We know that Aaron Rodgers loves to target his wide receiver ones. Now, the benefit of this roster that Aaron Rodgers has that he hasn't really been a part of since some of the best teams he's had in Green Bay is the depth, right? You have certified studs at multiple spots. Garrett Wilson, you have Tyler Conklin, you have Brees Hall coming out of the backfield. You even have the young cats who are looking really, really good. So maybe that eats into it a little bit, but the takeaway, the unequivocal takeaway here is that Garrett Wilson's going to eat. I'm taking him among over probably all but Sauce Gardner and maybe Passer 10, right? We've also seen him have some trouble with, I think it was Snead when we seen the Chiefs matchup last year. But outside of those two or three guys, I like our odds with Garrett Wilson lining up against anybody else. What's good, Harlan? Nice to have you guys in here. Lashad, I see you. Hot Sauce Jerk, appreciate it. Malik Taylor. Now, it's interesting seeing him as the immediate backup to Garrett. I don't consider him. So this is part of what makes Garrett special, right? There's nobody that quite brings the same skill set that Garrett Wilson is going to bring. When you talk about that, Z type receiver, guy that's going to be out there running a lot of slants, flank routes, and all those kind of things. Malik Taylor can do all of those, right? He's a guy that's going to bring some speed. He's a guy that's going to bring some size to the position a little bit. And ultimately, you're really relying on a lot of projection with him, right? You take a look at the rest of that depth chart. It's a lot of unknowns in that wide receiver core. Outside of Garrett Wilson, there's not a ton of people you look at and immediately say, I have the utmost confidence in, right? We have Xavier Gibson in the slot. We have Allen Lazard. Question marks with every one of those guys, right? Xavier Gibson, you feel good about because all offseason you heard that he's been able to absolutely destroy zone coverage for the Jets. And keep in mind, we're running some kind of cover 2, cover 3 shell type defense. So there is a pretty strong emphasis on zone coverage techniques, off-man ability, being able to, backpedal and read and react to the ball until we go into those man coverage looks. Xavier Gibson doesn't care about any of that, right? So that's the good news, but still we have to keep in mind we've seen him only, he's had less than 200 yards his rookie year after having some ample opportunity. Allen Lazard, former wide receiver 1 in Green Bay, struggles to get 300 yards, right? I think he had 311 total last year. You've seen everything about his play last year look unplayable, for lack of better words, right? The route running was subpar, and he's never a guy that's really been known for his route running anyways, right? He's in that Jason Brownlee mode of, I will have the length, I'll have the wide catch radius. If you put the ball up there, I'll be able to, come down with it. If you think about it this way, the ceiling of a guy like Allen Lazard and the Jason Brownlees is Mike Williams. Now, Mike Williams brings speed and stuff, which not all these guys share, but that's essentially the ceiling that you're looking at, Mike Williams. The floor is also Allen Lazard, right? A guy that's not going to have the separation. Allen Lazard also, which was a huge call out when we picked him up in free agency, does not have the best hands. So you're purely looking at him for just the size, right? The 6'5 plus, and then his plus run blocking ability. You can really get that out of almost anybody, right? You can go and pick up any 6'5" guy off the street that's 220 plus pounds and say, hey, I need you to run block this man, and I need you to be able to high point some of these balls. If you get anybody that is doing a decent job with their hands, then you're getting a better product than Allen Lazard, in my opinion. But that's what we're looking at, right? Plenty of unknowns. We know his previous production has been good, and that's why you're relying on a guy like Aaron Rodgers to pull that back out of him. But we don't know until we see it on the field. And luckily, training camp practices have been pretty solid for him, right? You talk about Allen Lazard catching multiple touchdowns for multiple days in a row, making key plays when it comes to some of those gotta have it drills. That's what you want. Mike Williams was healthy. He's a legit number 2, 100%. I make the argument that in a world where you don't have Keenan Allen in the same offense as him, he's their wide receiver 1, right? He is a T. Higgins plus type character. If he doesn't have injury concerns, he's being looked up as one of the probably top 15 players in the NFL at his position. Look at the QB play last season and the play of the all-line. Yeah, 100%. A lot of that factors into it, right? So all of these guys, they get the Aaron Rodgers development bump. All of these guys get the offensive line bump, right? Now the ball doesn't have to be out in 0.3 seconds. Aaron Rodgers does a phenomenal job of being able to get that thing out of there in 2 to 3 seconds or less. And so everybody takes advantage of that, right? Everybody's being held accountable this year. We've heard it multiple times. We're finally seeing a semblance of the offense having what the defense has, right? If a play goes wrong, you can guarantee that Garrett Wilson's going to be on somebody's ass, and he's going to want to run it back. He's going to want to get it right. Sean Jefferson, he seemed like he's been amazing since he's come into the building. High-spirited, a lot of energy, not a guy that's just out there pulling the Keith Carter and just ripping guys to rip them. He's really going out there and getting the most out of them. And I love the fact that we've been focused a lot on technique during our training camp practices, right? It's been called out multiple times that the setup is different, right? We're not just doing push-ups and jumping jacks and running the length of the field for conditioning. We're actually going out there and implementing football drills, right? I wouldn't be surprised if you hear about some new techniques or like some new drills come out of these camps that can be implemented somewhere like the scouting combine, right? That's a reason why we wanted I can't remember the name of the guy that we wanted when we were interviewing Tony Dews. I think he went to the Titans, but nonetheless, there's been a huge focus on that, and I think we're seeing the early returns on it pretty frequently so far, right? Can't wait to see Conklin this year. Yeah, I'm hyped for him. I know there's been a lot of talk that Rodgers doesn't always highlight his tight ends and stuff. But make no mistake about this. Aaron Rodgers is going to attack whatever advantage we have over the defense. And there was a lot of games last year where the tight end should have been the feature of our offense outside of the run game and, obviously including Garrett Wilson. But they should have been the highlight, taking advantage of hurt linebackers, right? Having depth pieces come up, et cetera, et cetera. And Conklin's not seeing his first target to, halfway through the third quarter, beginning of the fourth quarter. So I'm really hyped for him. We have a real backup quarterback this year as well. That's one of the most underrated pieces I've been enjoying about covering a lot of these training camp practices is you get a legit feel for who still is, out exceeding, expectations here, right? When Tyrod Taylor is coming in, you're still seeing plenty of deep balls, right? So you can see what that looks like for guys when we want to, really get aggressive on offense. He also is a guy that has underrated accuracy. He can utilize his legs. So a lot of what you get out of Aaron Rodgers, you can see copied and can be reproduced by Tyrod Taylor. Obviously, there's only one Aaron Rodgers, but the key point here is that with Tyrod Taylor, you're not losing anything in the way of seeing what the development of some of these guys look like, right? If they're trash route runners with Aaron Rodgers, they're trash route runners with Tyrod Taylor. There's not going to be a huge difference. There's obviously and one of the other pieces as well to this, right, is that with Tyrod Taylor, with Aaron Rodgers, with Andrew Peasley, any of the quarterbacks, each of them are going to have their guys, right? There's a lot of rotating that's being done, et cetera, et cetera. But who stands out as some of these guys, right? Where Aaron Rodgers is obviously Garrett Wilson. He's been funneling a ton of stuff to Breece Hall as well. With Tyrod Taylor, you've been seeing a lot of action lately with Jason Brownlee. You've been seeing a lot of action with Malik Taylor, right? Who's been, he's been highlighted plenty during practice. And then Tyler Harrell is a name that I've been hearing come on quite a bit, right? Our speedster, the undisclosed or, top speedster from last year's draft class. So there's a ton to be excited about in that wide receiver room. The only thing I would say is keep the expectations modest, right? Malik Taylor was a guy that balled out last year. We got him into the regular season, nothing, right? And you don't really expect guys that are going to be your second and third stringers to have to go out there and do a ton of work anyways. Otherwise, something went wrong. But still, same situation. I equate him a lot to Jeff Smith, right? It's not the same boat you want to be in. Lance McCutcheon, the Tyler Harrells of the world. I see Brandon Smith over here, and I'm sure that he may get a bump. I'm going to be interested to see the next iteration of this, right? If I had to guess, I would say Garrett Wilson will still be first. Malik Taylor, you'll still see second. I would say Brandon Smith probably jumps in the fourth, with Tyler Harrell jumping in the third and Lance McCutcheon probably dropping into that fifth tier. Mainly because Lance McCutcheon, he did not capitalize on his opportunities last week, right? That Commanders game, Adrian Martinez laid out two beautiful balls for him, and he couldn't haul them in, right? He didn't do a good job putting himself in position to high point some of those. And ultimately, it stalled out. Could have been two promising drives, right? Ideally, you're probably up at least another 6 points for each of those drives if he didn't lose those. Taylor also has an injury history. Yeah, he's one of the guys I want to keep in bubble wrap. It's also a reason why I am a strong proponent of potentially keeping that third quarterback on the roster. There's a lot of gymnastics here, right? So for one, with the Jordan Travis situation, you have to hope he can see the field. I don't necessarily want to see him start the regular season on IR. The goal, even if we can't see him during training camp, for me, would be for him to be healthy going into the regular season. Then you can save Tyrod Taylor and keep him bubble wrap, not have too much wear and tear. Jordan Travis is running your scout team. He's going to be able to implement a lot of what any of these other dual threat quarterbacks are going to do. And then you can slowly but surely really start figuring out what you have in Jordan Travis. Brandon Smith had a couple nice catches on Saturday. Yeah, I was surprised. Brandon Smith was really a name that went over my head. I couldn't really remember anything about him. And then it hit me that we recently signed him when we had all those tryouts. I should be dropping a scouting breakdown for him before the week is out as well. So keep an eye out on that. Tight ends is interesting, right? So Tyler Conklin, undisputed. Jeremy Ruckert, I feel like there's not going to be any movements in those top two spots. What I will say is the tight end 3 battle is going to be, it should be interesting, right? You have Zach Kuntz coming off of his first year of development, a healthy offseason. We know the freakazoid that he is, and we know Ron Middleton is a great tight end coach. So you would hope you can see some more. And from everything I've heard, the blocking has really been the most improved piece for him. I know he got the shout out from Aaron Rodgers earlier in the offseason about him having strong chemistry with them during scout team, and him being one of the specific players that was really going out there and tearing up the defense when Aaron Rodgers was coming back. So that always lingers in the back of my mind. But I mean, honestly, we haven't seen it get put to practice out there in these training camps, right? He had his opportunities last week. One of the biggest plays for me, and I don't hear a ton of people talking about it, was I think Andrew Peasley was in already. He hit Zach Kuntz in the middle. He got cracked. He dropped the ball, which essentially was going to be a fumble. And Malik Taylor, dude's awareness was ridiculous on this play. Malik Taylor catches the fumble before it actually hits the ground. He takes off, pummels through a couple of guys, maybe picks up only like another 2 or 3 yards. So it was probably a 6 or 7 yard play ultimately. But that stuck out to me, right? But speaking of Zach Kuntz, the hands. For a guy with as much athletic ability as him, you would hope for 2 things. One, even if the hands aren't great, you should be enough of a route runner, enough of that athleticism should show to where you always have excellent leverage or you have separation ability. And we don't get a ton of that from him. So when it comes to a lot of those situations, the short hands, just the ball security in general, it's not where it needs to be right now. We're talking about a guy that's only had a year of development in the league. He was a very, very raw prospect for a reason. So the hope here is that by next year's offseason, you're talking about a completely different player, right? 2 years in the NFL should be a very transformational experience no matter who you are, right? It's the reason why when you look at defense, you get hyped, right? JBC didn't have a healthy offseason all last year, only got 4 snaps on defense, focused mainly on special teams, which requires a lot of focus and attention, but he gets a healthy offseason now. We're seeing him kill it, right? So you want to see that same kind of momentum for some of these guys on the offensive side. And you see it with guys like Xavier Gibson, for example, so far. But to another extent, right, when you talk about the O-line, you're seeing it with Max Mitchell, you're seeing it with Carter Warren in spurts. Wasn't that play the one that the rookie slot receiver made? I mean, he got himself involved. Zach Kuntz fumbled it, and Malachi ultimately ended up turning it into a positive play for us. So big nod to him. That play is going to live in my mind for a minute. I still go back and check out the all 22 in pieces while I'm looking at certain players and stuff. And that's definitely one of those high effort, high awareness plays that stuck out to me. O-line. So one of the great pieces here, you talk about all of the guys that are ahead of schedule, right? You have Tyron Smith that's heavily involved in practices, even though he's getting his ample vet rest days when it comes to team drills and stuff. You've had John Simpson healthy, Joe Tippmann healthy, AVT, he's coming back. He's working a modified schedule, but you're still seeing him out there for team periods quite a bit. Morgan Moses just started working himself back in, but this time last year, we're probably still maybe 3 weeks away from seeing the starting unit together, right? And it feels like we kind of have a good cadence this time. We should actually have that unit out there all together, very minimal issues after being able to work through individual periods and then them functioning through team periods. Um, and I couldn't be more than happy, right? Tyron Smith is as expected, Hall of Famer. He's killing it. You see, I've seen guys put out the all 22 breakdowns for, the all the reps from Olu Fashanu type videos. And you see flashes of exactly what Olu's been doing that he's picking up on, right? The phantom punch, getting guys to draw in, and he's able to go out there and steal some of that leverage, get inside the shoulder pads because they've taken a false step, a false move to try to counteract things like that. So absolutely love it. Then you have Joe Tippmann. The good news is it looks like he may be curving his snapping issues once again, right? But you do see elements of what made him a second round pick, right? The athleticism, the ability to go out there and wreck things when he gets to the second, third level, springs plenty of strong running games, run plays for us. So I'm still pretty high on him. I feel like there's been a negative cloud around him. But ultimately, Joe Tippmann still feels like he could be the future, right? There's no sane reason why you would have Aaron Rodgers, who's known for holding guys accountable. And yes, he's mentioned, peeling back on that a little bit as he's gotten acclimated to the Jets, but still a guy that if it looks bad, he's not going to have it, right? There's no reason he still speaks about Joe Tippmann being an all-pro caliber player if he's not seeing more good things than he's seeing bad, right? So I'm still a big fan of Tippmann. Can't wait to see him ball out. And also for the guys that are chanting for, we should have had JMS over him. Keep in mind, JMS did not have that great of a year last year, at least for the majority of the first portions of the season that I was kind of paying attention to some of the chatter. So it still looks like we came out of that draft class of centers fairly well. I am encouraged. So Carter Warren and Max Mitchell obviously were names that I was going to want to pay attention to. Willie Tyler was another name. There's some guys that pop up on some of my videos that are very bullish on him. He was the former Louisville tackle, right? I did not love the tape, honestly. He looked like a poor man's Mekhi Becton, and as we all know, that is not a compliment by any means. But at face value, it looked pretty solid, right? Now, one of the interesting pieces is that we have him on the depth chart here as guard. He did come in, if I'm remembering accurately, as a left tackle sometime at the end of like the third quarter, I think beginning of fourth quarter. So I don't know if they're just trying to train him in multiple positions, what the plan here is, but it looks like there may be some diversity they're looking for in terms of tackle guard versatility, right? Another version of the AVT without AVT having to be that guy if push comes to shove. Otherwise, I don't really have any complaints. My dark horse guy is Brady Latham in terms of the interior trio. Brady Latham was a guy, really liked what I saw out of him coming out of Arkansas. Colavao. I like a lot of these UFL guys. Honestly, haven't been able to watch hardly any UFL stuff other than little highlight clips and stuff that have been out there. Just don't really have the time to be diving into a whole separate league trying to look for stuff. But what I did see from a lot of the commentary from people involved in that arena of football was high regards for his skill set, right? So ultimately, my takeaway is exactly what Robert Saleh has been highlighting. The depth on this team is so much farther ahead than what we've had previously. Even though last year was trash in the way that we addressed it, this year worked out perfect. You plugged the holes for the starters that needed to be plugged. And the starters that you originally had that full year development. Now they get to work at their own pace. And when they get called up, you feel better about the performances that you're seeing. And that's why you get the highlights of Max Mitchell and Carter Warren earlier in practice holding up fairly well against the likes of guys like a Michael Clemens or JJ when he's switching sides, and some of these undrafted free agents that have been coming on, although they may have cold spurts. Yeah, that injury really did him in, but also I just think there was a lot of ego stuff with him as well. I think there's a lot of mental pieces to the game of football that if you don't have the right frame of mind, you're just not going to recover well from. What else have we had? Quarterback wise, I don't know where you guys fall on this, but I am a pretty big fan of what I've been seeing from Adrian Martinez, not just from the Commanders game, but generally what I've been able to pick up from the training camp practices as well. Keep in mind, there's a strong difference in playing styles here, right? Andrew Peasley is your quintessential field manager guy. He can make plays with his legs when necessary, and he did it pretty well in Wyoming, but that's not his calling card in the same way that it is for Adrian Martinez, right? Adrian Martinez, he looks to attack you with his legs, and he's done a better job already being around Aaron Rodgers and Tyrod Taylor when it comes to not just, Lamar Jackson's probably the best at this, right? If he sees something, he's going to attack it, and it's going to hurt you, right? Obviously, you would like to see a quarterback have like a 250-yard day, 2-3 touchdowns, no interception outing. But there's a reason why Lamar Jackson is a 2-time MVP. He's out there, right? He'll kill you with a 100-plus yard day on the ground, maybe 180 yards through the air, but 2 touchdowns. Like, I can live with that. As a total package, it's very frustrating, and especially when you get around those defenses that are more aggressive, the blitz packages, etc. Having a guy like Adrian Martinez just does wonders for you, right? And if he can piece the mental piece together as well to fit in with that ability, you're looking at your Josh Allen types, right? That's a reason why he's so rare of a prospect. So I'm not saying he'll get to that or anything, but seeing these early flashes from Adrian Martinez coming off that season, and the tape definitely looks a lot better than what I've seen even from the UFL, but definitely from when he was with the Lions as an undrafted free agent. Very encouraging, right? I actually seen him go through his progressions, actually seen him keep his eyes downfield in some of these plays where he probably could have ran and picked up 15 to 20 yards, but he was able to give his guy a chance, and we ended up picking up 30 to 40 yards, right? So huge pluses there to him. Not a fan of Olu on the right all of a sudden. Salah said that wouldn't happen, and here we are. Not necessarily. So Salah said, I think in one of his press conferences last week, that the plan was to get him some work there, but they thought it would be a couple of weeks. I took that to mean that maybe right before the regular season kicks off, or maybe into the regular season. He seems to double back on that pretty immediately, but I think that was a direct result of what we've seen with the Commanders, where you've seen the technique, you've seen the sound fundamentals, you've seen him recognizing what the defense was trying to do to him. Granted, it was very vanilla. So now they want to try to give him that opportunity on the right side, right? You learn from Olu Fashanu. You're picking up the techniques. You can implement them and execute them well on the left side. Now you want to see what you can pick up from Morgan Moses real quick in a worst-case scenario situation, because keep in mind, I would love to see Olu specifically just get fixated and work on the left side, but he's undeniably the best offensive lineman not named a starter, right? There's a reason why we were considering even giving him a competition for our side as fans, putting him in a competition with a guy like John Simpson to see if he can even beat him out there, right? So I would love to see him focus there, and then love to see Carter Warren or Max Mitchell focus specifically on the right side. But it makes sense to put your best asset out there. And while he's not expected to be a starter as well, give him those reps, give him the opportunity. That way, he's not just thrown into the fire if he does need to step up for whatever reason. He already has some level of familiarity with it. He already has some ability to go out there and hit the field running. I only see Martinez in the Commanders games, but he seems better than our guy. Yeah, 100%. 100%. If we had Adrian Martinez last year, I imagine Zach Wilson is probably having trade talks creep up, before the trade line. and I trade deadline, and I know they were there last year anyways, but I think we would have gave it a significantly uh, bigger look, right? Um, which to me just speaks more to about maybe the lack of ability Zach Wilson was showing. I was one of those guys that maybe fed into like the Chiefs game way more than I should have. It is what it is. I seen maybe two solid games from Zach Wilson last year. Also, the preseason looked a lot better than what we were seeing before, which isn't saying a lot, right? If you take the worst person on any team, and they're suddenly not the worst player anymore, they're second or third, worst on their team. That's not a reason to praise them per se. It's just maybe more so speaking to the fact that the coaching staff around him was able to, coax some stuff out of him a little bit more. I don't really expect too many changes, on the running back room, for example. I think at this point, Braylon Allen has won me over. I think he's going to be locked in as that second guy. I do think Isaiah Davis is still essentially like the 2B to Braylon Allen's 2A. When it comes to the rep breakdown by, season's end, I can definitely see him being, on par with Braylon Allen in terms of total snaps, right? Maybe Braylon Allen gets a little bit more focus in the run game, gets sprinkled in the receiving game, whereas Isaiah Davis maybe becomes more of the pass blocking back, maybe is focused on a little bit more in the receiving game, and then he's sprinkled in the running game, right? I think we'll see a lot of that depending on if we actually end up being leading a lot of these games going into the second half, where you can start to chip back on Breece Hall snap counts and you can start focusing more on the depth in the running back room and seeing what you have there. But I think this is pretty much a lock, right? If anything, and I know Izzy's had some pretty decent practices recently. If anything, I still like Xavier Valladay. It was one of the UDFAs that I wanted us to give a shot to last year. Didn't really happen. He hasn't I would even say, and maybe this is just because he doesn't have, he wasn't drafted. The name recognition isn't quite there. I haven't heard a ton from Xavier Valladay. When I've seen the comments, they've been somewhat glowing. But I haven't seen anybody call out he's had huge gains. He's had touchdowns. He's been showing out here, and here. I think he could have a Zonovan Knight type rise potentially when he gets that example, when he gets those opportunities. But I think that's huge projection, right? Based on what I've seen even in the Commanders game, and he's a guy I want to go back and check for too. There wasn't a ton to be like overly excited about or say he's doing this fairly well and Izzy isn't. So we'll see ultimately what happens there. But defensively is probably, and it's weird to say because I feel like the offense is where you would expect to see the most changes, right? Garrett Wilson's locked in, Conklin, Rucker's locked in. We know our starting five is locked in. We know our running back, quarterback room is locked in. So like, it's been more so the development of guys that we had to rely on last year. It's been more so the new pieces on the offensive line, right? Even depth wise, I don't know, some shifts, but not necessarily as much as I probably expected last year, right? I probably thought it was going to be a complete overhaul of a lot of these weapons, a lot of pieces on the O-line, stuff like that, but not necessarily. Defensively, there, depending on what happens with Haason Reddick, right? And let's this will probably be our break point, right? Let's segue into the Haason Reddick conversation a little bit here. I have no idea what to make of this, right? So I've thought about this. I spent like the first 3 hours of work while I've been coding away and doing other stuff. Listening to a lot of ESPN and Good Morning Football and all these guys start to chime in, First Disputes, First Take, all of these guys. Everybody's essentially saying the same thing in a different way, right? The root cause of the issue is if you're the New York Jets, you don't have a ton of turnover on the defensive line last year, right? In terms of the highly impactful guys. Jermaine Johnson's still there. Quinnen Williams is still there. You still have the pieces of, Michael Clemens and Solomon Thomas and, some of those depth pieces that were eating up a majority of the snap count. You're replacing Javon Kinlaw with the likes of Quentin Jefferson. You're replacing Al Woods with Lecky Fotu, right? But it's not like you're missing a huge chunk of the sacks, of the pressures that are coming from these guys. And I would argue in certain elements that you're upgrading here, right? Now, Haason Reddick was never a need. That's the hill I'm ready to die on. Haason Reddick was never a need for this defense, right? When people talk about our Super Bowl window and going out there and earning a chip and getting deep into the playoffs, Haason Reddick wasn't make or break, but he's definitely a guy that was going to enhance this defense in a significant way. There's When you have two guys, right, there's a reason why Raiders fans are clamoring to get Max Crosby some significant help, right? If you have two elite edge presences, the game completely changes for you, right? You can't just, as a offensive coach, suddenly say, let's shift coverage here, let's do double teams, let's do chip blocks. Now the conversation goes more so like, we need to try to find a way to run max protection all game, but still utilize our weaponry, right? Which is hard to do now because your two tight end sets are more so focused on having your tight ends help block as opposed to, or do chip blocks, right? And then have a hot route to the flats or something quick to give your quarterback an option. You're not attacking downfield as much. You're not doing all of these things, right? And that's for teams that have two great tackles, which many teams aren't, right? There's a dearth of offensive line talent, right, coming in right now. So I go from that standpoint, right? That's where I start out. Never a need. This was a significant enhancement. Now, everything starts to get very muddy once you get into this whole, what did the trade conversations up front happen like? So keep in mind, we have the tampering laws, right? So we can't directly go to Haason Reddick and say, we really like you, right? Let's start the courtship process. I like you. I want you, right? We turn into the boondocks at this point because now it's we can do this the easy way or we can do this the hard way. But I like you. I want you. We want to trade for you. What hill are you ready to die on? We know you want a multi-year contract, and we've had the reports come in that Joe Douglas offered one, right? It was rejected, and I don't know what the timeline here is looking like for all of that, but we made some kind of offer. I would assume it's around the time that we made the trade official, right? And the Eagles accepted. It was rejected. We probably said, okay, here's at least a framework we can work around. Haason Reddick maybe gave the thumbs up, or at least his agent did. And we figured, a couple weeks at most, we probably have it done. Let's just get him in. Haason Reddick shows up to the press conference. He says all the right things, loves to be in New York. All of the pieces that we have are amazing. He's absolutely set to have career years, all of this good stuff. And then we get ghosted, right? Don't call me, don't text me, don't show up to my address. Matter of fact, we won't even be in the same country anymore. I'm in Japan with the samurai hat on, watching sumo wrestling, chilling. What happens at that point, right? Let's say, even worst case scenario, the Jets said, hey, I want Haason Reddick, go get him. Joe Douglas does that, not having any framework of a deal in mind. How do you get to the point that you as a player decide you won't even show up to anything, right? Zilch. You do the press conference and then it's nothing. I'm not going to work on bonding with my teammates, even though I don't want to practice. I'm not going to start diving into the playbook, right? We have no idea what Haason Reddick's knowledge of our defense is, right? Does he even understand some of the most basic calls? Does he understand nothing? And two, you've also kind of already, if you're Haason Reddick, you have essentially, and we have great guys on our defense, right? Quinnen and Sauce Gardner and some of these guys, the DJ Reeds, Quincy, those guys will bring him in and embrace him and try to get him acclimated quickly. But you have ostracized yourself in this defense regardless if you're Haason Reddick, because you have already walking in, and this is the weird situation where I kind of put some heat to Joe Douglas, because why would you even create this within your environment, right? But you've ostracized yourself to the point that if I'm anybody within that team, offense, defense, special teams, you're not about the team. You were about your bag, which is all fine and dandy, but it's come at the expense of us, right? You were supposed to be the piece to help put us over the top, make us an undisputed, top defense in the NFL, whatever. Why would you even put yourself in that situation, right? This is why the trade request, not from a leverage standpoint, makes sense to me. But if you're Haason Reddick, the idea is I'm not going, when I come in, right, when my brand new, let's call it 3-year extension, I'm making $26 million, dollars or so on average a year. You guys have hit me up for $4 or $5 million in fines. You're not being celebrated. I'm a team guy as much as anybody else, but if I'm on that football team and you walk in, you're already, 12 practices plus behind. We got to spend all this additional time investing into you to get you up to speed, veteran or not. There's still going to be an acclimation period. You're not being celebrated if you're me. Me as a Jets player, I've been here a year or two already, right? You've done nothing for us. Absolutely nothing. I understand your resume coming in, which is why we wanted you and all this kind of stuff, but you haven't bled blood for us. So what are we even talking about here, right? And once he gets on the field and he works his magic, I'm sure some things can start to be ironed out, but it's the equivalent to like Alan Lazard trying to hold people accountable or like call people out last year. Like, and even in his situation, at least he was out on the field. He was doing more harm than good in most cases, but he was out there. He was with the team. He was trying to work at things. Haason Reddick, in my eyes, hasn't done any good faith efforts at this point. And I don't count the press conference. I don't accept him showing up to the press conference as a good faith. You had to go there to sign your contract to probably continue part of your pay schedule and however that works out ultimately for him. But it's a very annoying thing for a player to it seems like he's hiding behind the wall, right? And obviously you have an agent for a reason. You want him to deal with all of these things up front. But it's a very annoying thing to the point where it seems like the player has almost no say-so on what's happening here. He's relying 100% on whatever his agent is advising him to do. And in my opinion, is wrong, right? There's plenty of guys out there, the NFL analysts, that are saying, you have no leverage. Are you going to sacrifice an entire year just because you want a multi-year contract and you're still going to be in the Jets' clutches again, right? And you haven't done, to our knowledge, you've done nothing. There's been no real negotiating from your side. You've had a contract offer. You've rejected it. We haven't seen you at what point, at all. Since the press conference, you've barely talked to the coach. In my eyes, you probably barely talked to Joe Douglas. And the only thing that we've heard from you in this entire time is a couple, him showing up the jersey, right, for some of his annual youth football camps, and then you putting out a tweet saying, don't believe everything that's in the media. This is 100% one of those situations, in my opinion, where you want to go out there and try to clear some things up, right? Maybe he doesn't care about if he's being killed, left and right for being, a jackass or whatever, terminology people want to put out there. But I don't understand how you let this go on for this long. And it feels like it's a one-sided negotiation. It's the Jets battling against themselves, which is what you get for going out and trading for your player and putting yourself in this situation. But I just don't see the end game. I've tried to rationalize this a ton over like the last 48 hours, and I just can't get to the point where you've already sacrificed almost a third of your current contract, right? Your $14.25 million in fees, and the fact that you get a multi-year contract just makes everything better. It is blowing me for the life of things. I really can't fathom what the game plan here is for him. I really don't want to reward this behavior. I don't think it's a good message. Yeah, and that's the other piece, right? I know a lot of people have chimed in and they've said, well, if you give him the contract, right? So here's a couple of things, right? When you take a look at the landscape of the NFL and you look at the CD Lamb issues, you look at the Jamar Chase issues, you look at, Micah Parsons and what he's potentially going to be dealing with, and so on and so forth. But some of those high profile guys, every general manager or the owners or whatever high profile guy in front office is going to tell you, well, hey, we only have so much money. You are who you are. We respect it, honestly, but I don't, there's going to be some pushback over record setting contracts and this, that, and the third. We have to have a ton of those tough conversations with Garrett Wilson, who's been in one of the most unenviable situations for a guy that should be probably a top 5 guy at his position. If you just had decent quarterback play, average quarterback play, you can probably even argue below average. What he's had is historically piss poor. Then you flip to the backfield. You have Breece Hall, who's had to sacrifice his body for essentially no reason, because our hopes and dreams have been killed so early in the offseason that at that point you're taking punishment for absolutely nothing. If you're just one of those guys that love achievement, you can say your personal development, but he's getting railroaded for absolutely no reason. Then you flip to the defensive side, the staple of our teams, defensive line, cornerback, Jermaine Johnson. He's been on a trajectory that's insane, right? And if he can eclipse double-digit sacks this year, keep up his elite run defense, he's going to be talked about in that top tier up there, just below the Max Crosbys and the TJ Watts and stuff, right? Because at that point, we've seen you reach that level. Now you have to do it consistently, right? That would be what separates them to me. Then you have Sauce Gardner. Now, if you're not Mike Florio and some of the other random weirdos out there, Sauce Gardner is at least in the realm of reason your top 3 cornerback his first 2 years. Looks like he's geared to do it again in year 3 based on what we've been seeing in the matchups with him and Garrett Wilson and what we think Garrett Wilson can be. He's going to break the market at cornerback right now. I don't know if Pat Surtain signs before he does a contract extension. If he hasn't already, I'm not really up to date on what's happening with him. But he's going to get a record-breaking contract, undeniably, right? There's no reason, rhyme, or matter that he doesn't. You're going to go to either one of those guys that's been in the trenches with us and tell them, hey, I don't have the money, but you paid the guy that never showed up to nothing, didn't do anything to help the team, no kind of team camaraderie or chemistry here at all. You're going to tell them you don't have the money, and then they go in the locker room and they look at that guy. It's not going to be a good look for us, guys. I will I tell you, I honestly tell you, if we end up finding a way to extend this guy, it's not going to be heavily performance-based, right? We're not going to look at the contract and say, well, actually, that's a hell of a deal, right? I wouldn't be surprised. In my best case scenario is that we keep 2 of our 4 guys, right? JJ, Garrett, Breece, Sauce. 2 of the 4 is my hope. I wouldn't be surprised if it's hard for us to keep 1 if Reddick gets that contract. I think there could be a bit of a mutiny in the locker room when it just comes to how Joe Douglas has tried to set up getting some of these extensions banged out. And with us having to provide a ton of resources into the offense, paying Aaron Rodgers, getting Mike Williams, getting Tyron Smith, which keep in mind, if they hit the high end of their incentives, it's going to be more money. It's not like we've been frugal and able to sit a ton of stuff aside to get prepped for a Sauce Gardner contract and a Garrett Wilson stuff. So we're going to have to go out there and find that money again. This offseason, I don't know what the numbers are, but we made moves to increase our cap quite a bit, right? We had the TV contracts and stuff that made the cap a little bit higher than expected. JFM trade, some of the guys that were released. That money almost feels non-existent, right? We're sitting around $6 million, and we're hoping we don't have to use that money due to injuries throughout the season, right? Otherwise, If you're sitting 20 to 30 million, I guarantee you we would have signed a safety already. Quandre Diggs or Simmons, they would have already been on our roster, and we'd be singing the praises of Joe Douglas. But everything here looks like things could go left for us pretty quickly, which is a little concerning. And at this point, I just wanted to stop, right? Like, ultimately, it is a trash look for the franchise to go out there and trade for a guy. If they had a plan in place, it was a poor plan for working out this contract situation with him. Now, this is the piece that I kind of focus on because this is where I feel like, and I've seen some of the reports yesterday, miscommunication around Haason Reddick agreeing to hit the field for the year and then it definitely being worked out in the midst of the year, right? If by week 8 you're looking how we expected you to look, you're going to get this extension out of us. That's the only thing that really is kind of a saving grace to the Jets. Otherwise, I don't want to assign them full blame. I don't even want to say they necessarily have the majority of it, outside of you shouldn't have put yourself in this position to begin with. But this will go down as one of the worst moves to occur in the NFL. You trade for a guy, you know his demands. And here's the other thing. We've seen a lot of these verbal agreements, right? You see it all the time in free agency. A guy agrees to a contract, maybe a last minute tug gets him somewhere else. Like, verbal agreements, and Joe Douglas, he's seasoned enough to know this, means nothing in the NFL. If it isn't on paper, it is what it is. And we're not in a position as a franchise where we can say we've been successful this decade. We've been overly successful this decade. Look at Aaron Rodgers. Look at all these fancy pieces we have in place. Trust us. We'll get something worked out. You're going to look great. We don't have that chip on our shoulder to bet with. I don't understand the confidence in having this deal done, whether it was upfront or whether it's now. And at this point, I do respect Joe Douglas essentially holding him hostage. What I will say, though, is that I think this does become a situation where you do need to entertain the idea of trading him. I don't know what that looks like. Pennies on the dollar. You know, I mentioned this a few times before. But this needs to be a distraction that ultimately leaves the building, right? You don't want this looming over the head where now once you start creeping up to week 6, week 7, week 8, the trade deadline is coming up. Week 6 is and week 6, I think, was the official timeline I saw. Week 6 is the official time where if he's not participating in games by then, his contract tolls. We're going to keep him for the remainder of the year. Like, one of the other good points that I've seen pointed out too is that if guys didn't want to pay for him during the offseason, a month and a half ago, 2 months, whatever it was, what makes you think after they've exhausted their research? Keep in mind, Justin Simmons, Quandre Diggs, safeties for plenty of teams that needed these guys were still out there, and guys didn't want to pay for them, right? These guys just came off the market within the last couple weeks. Guys didn't want to pay for the top tier guys at their position. Obviously, edge is more suitable when it comes to those contract extensions than safety is. But if they didn't want to pay for the top guys then, and some of these guys were pressed against the cap, what makes you think that they're going to move and shift some things around to get it done now, right? And then they end up being on the same end of the stick that the Jets were, because now the Jets feel like they have all the leverage, right? So I'll just keep this player if he doesn't want to, participate and do what he needs to do for us. I'm not just going to let him go. And we've seen Joe Douglas be stingy about this before. I'm not just going to let him go for nothing or anything, right? Unless I absolutely have to. I can see Joe Douglas just sitting on this contract for a whole nother year until somebody decides we'll take the shot on it, and then they try to iron out the trade and all that kind of stuff. So this is just one of those things where it's been a poisonous situation. It really just feels like this will linger over our heads for a while. This is going to 100% impact any of the contracts that we're dealing with for the foreseeable future, depending on whatever we end up doing with it. good, bad, or otherwise. And it's ultimately just not needed right now. I would much rather be in a position where, you know, we're having to worry about an injury that's crept up and if we'll have a guy for the year when he comes back and all that kind of stuff, as opposed to this. Contract issues should realistically be done by now. The only thing that I can say in terms of this potentially getting worked out is that the good news was, I think the agent that he has is one that's shared with Debo Samuel, and I forgot the other names that I've seen, right? But where was I going with this? He shares an agent with those guys. We've seen a lot of those contracts go down to the finish line, right? It's minutes, hours a day before when you would absolutely need to try to get that done before the regular season kicks off, and then something happens. So this seems to be more so a ploy of his agent, his agency, whoever you want to assign the blame to on that side, where this is just consistent behavior on how they operate. Um, but I don't know. This just seems like another one of those things where we should have been able to navigate this a whole lot better, right? Aaron Rodgers' Egyptian trip should probably be the like craziest thing hanging over our head this offseason. Instead of you, and that's really the biggest problem, right? You went out and sought this issue. It's not like the Eagles approached us with the trade and then we thought we had some stuff worked out and went left. We went out and pursued this, and the plan in place just looks absolutely crazy. Bless Reed with the new contract instead of Reddick. I should be dropping a video on that actually this week. My opinion on this has changed quite a bit. What would the trade market for Reddick be? A 6th-round pick? Yeah, I have no idea. For one, how many teams even have the money, right? Or even I guess you can make the argument every team, whether they have a true need or not, would probably be in on this trade. But like, who has the money? Who has the resources? I would probably say that at minimal, Joe Douglas is probably willing to take a 4th-round pick. How far in the future that looks and stuff, I don't know. 4th-round pick is probably the worst I would settle on if I'm JD. He can probably, because we've also seen him turn, garbage into a full course meal. He could probably find a way to at least recover that 3rd-round pick. Maybe he takes somebody else's compensatory pick in exchange for him or something like that. But it's a lot working against you, right? It's not too dissimilar from Zach Wilson's drama, where you have this substantial contract. In his case, a player who's vastly underperforming as well. But then you also have to work out trade compensation. So a lot of components to it. But I think we can still probably get a 3rd or a 4th from him realistically. Keep in mind, his performance isn't the issue. It's all this additional drama. And one of the other good points that I did see get pointed out was that nobody has wanted to really extend Haason Reddick to this point. Why? A player that's at the top of his position year after year after year, multiple teams, and nobody has really wanted to get a deal done with him, or at least they haven't been able to get an acceptable deal done, right? So is he really asking for something egregious? Or is there more to maybe the personality, something on field that we're not seeing, right? I know the rumors were put out there about him being a sack chaser, which I don't think is even necessarily a bad thing in the grand scheme of things, more so depending on what team you're going to and the philosophy and stuff. But there's a lot more to this craziness than I think meets the eye. Reddick uses the same agent that Joe Douglas uses. Oh, you got to be kidding me. That's insane. That feels like a feels like a conflict of interest. I feel like there should be anyways, a complete separation there. I don't know how that helps out anybody. We got 2 dogs ready, JJ and McDonald. Sorry, yeah, it's trusting your draft picks, right? Yeah, I mean, even if McDonald doesn't look 100% of the way you want him to, and you would like somebody that has a proven production out there. You've already heard Saleh mention the key pieces. Will McDonald can perform against the run. He's learning how to beat guys across their face when it comes to pass rush moves. He already has a signature pass rush move, and we know he can impact the quarterback. So let him, the coaching staff does a great job of developing guys, whether it's on the fly or not. Let him be one of those guys that have to figure it out trial by fire. He's asking for it, right? Ultimately. The more pressing issue, Sauce getting burned by Lazard for a touchdown. Yeah, I'm assuming that's probably from today's training camp. I know Alan Lazard got him for a catch over the middle or the sideline earlier in training camp. So stuff like that you don't want to see it again. No, no cornerback is perfect, and at least from a physical standpoint, Lazard matches up with him. So Reddick doesn't have a single sack in his last 4 games last season. Is he getting old? No, I wouldn't say so, right? So this is the same guy that in the fourth quarter, I think he has 18 and a half sacks over the last 4 years, and nobody else comes close. TJ Watt, Garrett, Parsons, none of those guys know how to close out a game in the same way that Haason Reddick does. I would probably say the focused attention, because he does play more of a finesse game, has a lot to do with it. They also were dealing with some unfamiliar issues when it comes to not having an offense that's consistently staying out there, and probably some wear and tear late into the season and stuff. So he doesn't have a game that's going to age well, which is probably also a reason why guys don't really want to pay him. But I wouldn't say I don't think he's going to fall off a cliff performance wise, right? But I don't know. Sitting a whole off season isn't going to help things whatsoever. Yeah, that's crazy. I don't know. I'm going to get out of here, though, guys. Wrap up this lunch break and whatnot. Finish out work. I plan to hopefully try to squeeze in some live streams. I got a baby due in a couple months, so try to eke out some extra time with everybody outside of the video formats and get some things going. But appreciate everybody that was able to pull up, jump in, give your thoughts and opinions, etc. And I'll catch up with you guys again. Enjoy your days.